I would say just think about what it is that you want out of the business. And then instead of reverse engineering the business, how am I going to start this business? Reverse engineer, how am I going to get to the outcome that I actually wanted from this? And you may find very stimulating answers. It may be that there are just a myriad of other routes to get to your desired outcome. But it's so easy to get tunnel visioned on, I've got a great idea, I'm onto something, I'm onto this thing. But we're all pursuing outcomes. The world just runs on desired outcomes at the end of the day. So start there. And you may find that there are other ways to, if you're starting a consumer goods business because you're really good at marketing, you maybe consider maybe you should start that consumer goods business, but maybe you should start a services business. Maybe you should start a consulting business. Maybe you shouldn't start a business. So there could be other factors in your life or other things that you want. Everyone's different. So try to not buy into hype or buy into the stuff you're reading on the glamours of entrepreneurship. I'm not unencouraging you or disencouraging you from starting a business. I'd just say start from the outcome and try to imagine 5 different paths of how to get to that outcome. And you may find that you thought of that one before, the business, and I want to get to this outcome. And then you're like, oh my God, life is so rich. There's so many ways to get there. I found that a rewarding exercise as I've gotten deeper into this world.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Launch Boom podcast. Today we have Gareth Everard. Gareth is the founder of Rockwell Razor, Lomi, and many other consumer brands. As the CMO of Lomi, he generated over $100 million in revenue in just 2 years. He is also an angel investor, board member, and partner in several other technology companies, agencies, and local businesses. Welcome to the podcast, Gareth.
Thanks, man. Thanks, man. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you as well. So I thought a fun place to start would be what got you interested in being involved in so many businesses? Were you just born that way and you had those tendencies to create and build new things? Or was it a encouragement from a mentor? How did that happen?
That's a good question, because sometimes people ask how you got into entrepreneurship, but you went right for the jugular with why are you doing so many things? The answer is somewhat because I'm a fool. It really goes against conventional wisdom. But yeah, I started with Rockwell 10 years ago, and I was in my senior year of college. And it was pretty soon after that it became evident to me that you learn things that you can't necessarily apply to the business that you've already started. And I think it's the desire to apply learnings that really drives me. So whenever I discover something new, some sort of new growth advertising method or sort of video methodology that's working really well for us on ads, it makes me want to get involved in having a growth agency or have a video agency. When I come across local businesses I love that I want to support, I always try to find a way. And then, much to the chagrin of my accountants and lawyers, it just ends up being a whole collection. So here I am 10 years later with far more businesses than I ever thought I'd need or want. But I'm loving it, man. It's really, really fun.
Yeah. So the last time you and I caught up, Gareth, you were saying, hey, I've gotten to the point where I really don't have to start anything anymore. What motivated you in the beginning with Rockwell Razors, and then what motivates you now?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, you're taking me way back, but I went to college on a track and field scholarship, and then got a pretty bad, devastating, one might say, injury in my first year. I ended up just finding kind of in all that open space that arises when you ran track for hours and hours a day, and all the training, kind of time becomes available. And I ended up finding what was called a social entrepreneurship club on campus. And I switched my degree over time from pre-medical to environmental science, and there was a class. So I was taking these business classes, I was in a business club, and I was taking environmental science classes. And I had one day where there was a lecture where they were showing us birds choking to death on razor blades in a landfill. Sorry to go dark way early in the podcast. But then in my very next, my next lecture, it was like a complete love fest for the Dollar Shave Club ad that, of course, everyone remembers the Dollar Shave Club ad that went viral forever ago while I was in school. So I just, this dichotomy of seeing this thing celebrated in business that just an hour before I had heard kind of the impact that cartridge razors have on the environment, while being in sort of a social and environmental, being president of actually the Social and Environmental Impact Club on campus. It just really, it kind of hammered home a couple things to me. So, you see the razor thing, and immediately a person who I'd grown close with, who was a little knowledgeable about razors, it just all kind of came together. That we realized we could start Rockwell, which uses recyclable razor blades, and we tried to make them easier to shave with. Anyways, this isn't a Rockwell story time, but that was effectively the onus was, hey, can we make a razor that doesn't produce landfill waste, and can we make it easier to shave at a lower cost than cartridges? And then we launched the Kickstarter campaign back in 2014, and goal of $12,000, and it did $150,000, which I remember in 2014 that was really good on Kickstarter. Yeah, it's really exciting. We just kept going from there. Rockwell ended up doing 2 more crowdfunding product launches. It was 4 crowdfunding campaigns between Kickstarter and Indiegogos and In-Demands and all those different things. So yeah, that was kind of my first exposure to entrepreneurship, first exposure to crowdfunding, and here we are. I can't quite seem to quit those crowdfunding campaigns.
There's so much that we can dive into there, Gareth. And, I didn't tell you this before we started the podcast, but, feel free to rant and talk as much as you want. We can always edit it out later, right? So you talked about track and the devastating injury. One of the questions that I sent you in advance was, hey, what was something that was devastating that at the time that led to something greater, essentially, that in hindsight you can look at it and go, oh my gosh, that was such a blessing in disguise. Can you just talk a little bit more about that injury and then how that led into entrepreneurship? Yeah,
well, I started running track when I was very young, probably pre-puberty, which is what I found out in university when I just suddenly, there was this ripping and tearing feeling in my leg one day at practice. Finally went in for proper x-rays at the sports clinic on campus, and long story short, they basically found out that a bunch of stuff had torn, a bunch of ligaments and things that I can barely remember the names of, and perhaps a bunch of acronyms. They effectively, they also said a major cause of it was that effectively my leg did not fit into my hip. This is a very non-technical description, but their solution suggested was, hey, why don't we put you under for a surgery, cut you open, pop your leg out, shave down the bone that fits into your hip, pop it back in, you'll be on crutches for 9 months, and you'll have a shot at running competitively again. And I was like, what's the alternative? And they were like, run casually as much as you want for the rest of your life, but you're not going to run, you're not going to run competitively. And then I just Googled, Major League Running. Turns out there is no Major League Running, so that wasn't a career. So I thought, you know what, let's keep it casual. So it was, I know I'm making light of it, but it was a fairly dark time. I'd wrapped a lot of my identity up for the back half of elementary school through middle school through high school, and intended to kind of continue that into university, but obviously not to be. Funny though, it dovetailed into, you're asking about just what was a crazy happening. I'd say one big one after that would have been when Rockwell raised that first crowdfunding campaign. 2,000 razors sold, effectively that $150,000 I mentioned earlier. We were working with a manufacturer in Milwaukee, using a metal manufacturing process called investment casting. It was more affordable than metal injection molding, but had slightly weaker tolerances, which is basically just the precision by which you manufacture these things. We thought it would be okay because we were dumb and young. In that order, maybe, I don't know. It was bad. We manufactured this stuff, and to my eternal regret, the razors, half of them were great, and the other half were not razors. They were like skin peelers. So those all got shipped out because we weren't doing quality control to the same procedures that a professional company that wasn't just two college kids trying to start a company together. And anyway, it was a bonkers experience because, of course, people are rightfully not happy. A bunch changed in the company. My original business partner ended up ultimately leaving. So I was sort of there being like, do I change my name on LinkedIn and, try to give life a new shot, or do I make this right? Obviously picked make it right. I found a gun manufacturer in Medina, Ohio, that would take us on and use metal injection molding, which was kind of like the gold standard on stainless steel precision manufacturing. It never really occurred to us to take any of the manufacturing overseas at the time. So it was all done in Ohio. And I'd also learned my lesson that I need to personally quality control everything. So I spent part of my senior year of college while writing my honors thesis and doing all that stuff, sleeping on weekday nights on the factory floor of this gun manufacturer in Medina, Ohio, which is just south of nowhere. And my little luxury on the weekend was I got to sleep at the Motel 8, or whatever it's called, because, of course, I couldn't stay at the factory on weekends. So that was pretty hellish in hindsight. But we shipped out 2,000 razors for free as free replacements, whether people liked the first one or they needed a replacement. We shipped it out for free on my dime. I was hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, but I think that really kind of set the foundation for what Rockwell is today, which is like high quality manufacturing, guaranteed kind of happiness type situation on an innovative product. It led to some of the other successes we had down the line. But it's funny to think back on that. I guess it was like 10 years ago now. Just those were interesting times. I say interesting, but I mean terrifying.
Oh my gosh. That story just gave me the goosebumps because, I launched my first campaign November of 2013 and raised $83,000, went to China, slept on the factory floors, ran into similar quality control issues where, products with similar attachments or products with certain attachments would create like a buzzing sound in the product, which was really annoying. And so we just had to continue to iterate on the production process and fix all those issues. So anyway, and get to the bottom of those issues. So it definitely gave me goosebumps as you were talking through that.
There you go. Factory floor blood brothers.
Almost,
learn something new about each other.
Almost PTSD,
Sorry about that.
I would give that up for anything, right? Yeah. And those are the experiences that really shape you as a founder or entrepreneur. So why did you decide to launch a crowdfunding campaign when you were looking to launch the first campaign? And how did you set that goal at $12,000?
We had no money. So that was definitely a leading motivator. $12,000 was the cost of the initial investment casting molds. So, of course, in our terrible budgeting brains, that was all we needed to get started. So $12,000 was how it was picked. We really did not think it would make more than that. But it made that overnight. Like we set it live, I think, on a Tuesday evening, not knowing at the time that Tuesday is a good day, by the way, to set a crowdfunding campaign. This is before like any of those sort of studies or knowledge was out. We just got lucky. And set it live. There was no preparation. There was no advertising really meaningfully going towards Kickstarter campaigns at that point. Certainly not that we knew about. I believe it ended up getting posted on to kind of like a subreddit of people who are passionate about sort of classic shaving, and that helped. I believe we were kind of the first. There have been many other razor crowdfunding campaigns since then. I'm not trying to pretend we're some sort of trendsetters. I'm sure they would have done it without us, but we did happen to get in there first, so I think it was sort of a remarkable event for the shaving enthusiasts on Reddit. So we got some love there, and then as you know, if some things kind of take off and you hit your goal in the first 36, 48 hours on Kickstarter, you're gonna have a good time, and we did until we completely screwed up the manufacturing, but already know that story.
So yeah, that was a totally different time, right? When I launched in November of 2013 and when you launched in 2014 and even, up until I would say 2017, it was the cutoff of a different age of crowdfunding in our minds. What do you see are the differences now in crowdfunding? What would you have done differently if you knew the current landscape? And you do now. Lomi launched fairly recently, and I'm sure you've kept up with some of the more recent crowdfunding raises as well.
Yeah, I mean, great question. I think originally all those crowdfunding sites were intended to be places for people to take concepts. I think it was sort of before there were a regular cadence of meaningfully large campaigns. I'm talking sort of $500,000, $1 million plus campaigns. The dollar amounts aren't as significant there as the number of people who can be overjoyed or disappointed by the performance of a campaign. So ultimately, product delivery and people forget when you're starting a campaign, you're not, unless you're deliberately doing this, which I don't recommend, you're not just doing a project, you're effectively starting a business. There are all sorts of business-esque, at minimum, business-esque tasks that you're signing yourself up for. An enormous customer service responsibility, quite a lot of accounting, a tremendous amount more accounting than I certainly expected starting out. Fulfillment, that's crazy. And manufacturing, I think people, perhaps in the before times, was not consistently such an understanding that when your idea got very successful, now you might have had a plan for how to manufacture 200 of some item, but now you're faced with the reality of shipping 4,000. And I think there were some high profile examples of expectations of customers not meeting reality. So all that to say, that leads me to your question was what's changed. I think crowdfunding's gone less from a place of, hey, I have an idea, what do you think of this very rough and tumble, rough and ready sort of landscape, to there's an expectation that there is a very meaningfully developed, financed, thoughtfully put together pathway to product delivery. Frankly, the advertising need on crowdfunding also shows a bit of a financing requirement now. So I'd say that it's shifted, because the jargon would be upstream. So instead of it being a place where maybe it's not as welcoming to hobbyists who have unfunded, unproven ideas as it was in perhaps 2013, 2014. And nowadays it's a good place if you've got some funding, you've got meaningful product development behind you, and have a well-researched, well-reasoned path to manufacturing. It's a phenomenal place for that. But yeah, I'd probably keep the rough and ready ideas off of crowdfunding for now. It's going to be, you're subscribing to heartbreak a little bit there.
So let's fast forward to Lomi and what you did there as one of the co-creators and chief marketing officer. And that's how you and I met, right? Back in August of 2020, I believe, is when you and I met. So talk to us a little bit more about that and where Lomi ended up being and how that crowdfunding, what differed between the Rockwell Razors crowdfunding campaign and the Lomi crowdfunding campaign. By the way, the Lomi crowdfunding campaign raised $7 million, right, on Indiegogo.
Bit different than the 150,000, which was Canadian dollars too. So put a 30% discount on that. Rockwell was 120 grand compared to in US dollars compared to Lomi's 7 million. What was different? Yeah, so we would have met probably around April, right? When it was getting ready to launch. The big difference is we had a incredibly talented creative team behind all of it. Where I was very lucky to have Tess, my creative director, just absolutely brilliant. I think it was her, my head of growth, Chris, and Tess and I just sat down in a room and banged out this script in an hour. And that script, that video that went up on crowdfunding, a derivative of that video, ended up running as an ad for, I think it still runs today. It's just sort of, we call it the hero video. Because obviously we've taken out all the crowdfunding references at this point as it runs sort of regularly on YouTube and Facebook now. But there was much better storytelling, obviously higher production value, we were much further along in the product development process for Lomi than I ever was for any Rockwell campaign. That was a theme through my entire career. So Rockwell to Keto to Lomi, we were always like better financed, further in development. I'd probably learned a little bit more about what sort of messaging resonates most with customers, what to highlight, how to storytell, I think is probably another big part of it. So all of those came together, and it would be difficult to discount. Lomi, I co-created with my partners who are the co-founders of a company called Case, which is a biodegradable phone case. So I ended up sitting as CMO of both of those things because it was complicated. It was technically under like one parent company, and we'd do all those things together. But we had the fortunate position of an enormous email list of people who were interested in eco-friendly solutions. So that's just one other thing I think probably to highlight is the enormous value of having an email list going into the campaign. Obviously, LaunchBoom helped us for Lomi acquire even more emails, but would be very important to highlight that going in with the email list size that we did for Lomi, we didn't necessarily have to pay for all of those, given that we were spinning Lomi out of Case. But then, of course, the work that LaunchBoom did with us to help acquire more emails just added fuel to the fire. So I guess that was a lot of thoughts, all kind of crammed into one rambling sentence, but all of those things come together to ultimately make the difference between a $120,000 campaign to $7 million.
So you might be going off of memory here, Gareth, but based on the numbers that you were able to achieve for Lomi, how much of those came from Pila's list versus a list that was newly developed and live advertising? Do you roughly remember the percentage split?
I do remember we got 13% organic from Indiegogo. That, well, according to them, I think they probably under allocate to themselves, which is bizarre for a platform. I believe it was 20% was from the original Pila emails, keeping in mind that we also, like my partners in Lomi and I were also a member of a business group. So they were it's called Mastermind Talks. It's headed by a guy named Jason Gaignard. He's incredible, and an incredibly supportive group of entrepreneurs in there with us. And they also kind of contributed a lot. I think those got allocated to the Pila case list. So call it roughly 20% there and 15% from Indiegogo. And the balance of it, so 65%, right? I can do math. 65% probably from like live advertising.
Gotcha. That's fantastic. Thanks for that rough breakdown. And, to all the listeners, obviously this is based off of memory and estimates. But it's good to at least have some rough estimates from the campaign. It was such a massive success that we ended up doing a webinar, and I'll link to that webinar with Indiegogo covering some of the learnings and takeaways as well in green technology. So let's go back. We're going to hop around quite a bit here. So you mentioned after Rockwell, you were hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. How did you get yourself out of that debt?
By selling more razors. I wish there was a fancier answer. Yeah, it was, people were, I think it's not every day that a business messes up as badly as we did, and then makes it right the way that we did. So when we launched our second product, the Model T, on also Kickstarter, that ended up being I'm doing Canadian again, but it was like a 400, so call it like $350,000 US dollar campaign. And that product ended up being even more successful on Indiegogo In Demand afterwards, because In Demand existed at that point. We've now fast forwarded to 2016, and continued to be immensely popular on our e-commerce, our Shopify store afterwards. So I would say it probably took until like 2016, 2017 that we then had the original product called the Rockwell 6S and the Model T were both in market. And we started getting some very meaningful wholesale interest, both domestically and internationally. So kind of a combination of good execution on wholesale, fair execution on direct to consumer, obviously a strong crowdfunding campaign to launch that all. We were able to ultimately pay down that debt by, I want to say, 2018.
That's incredible. So it took you 3 or 4 years to work out of that hole that's the first campaign dug you into, right?
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure there was a lot of doubts, a lot of fear during those times. What were some things that you did on a daily or weekly or monthly basis that allowed you to continue working through it? Because most people in those cases would have just given up, right? You mentioned mastermind talks, coaches. I mean, if that is one of the things that helped, or what else helped you during those times?
So it's funny, thinking back on timeline, I think the first year I went to MMT was 2018. So just kind of around the time that, actually, I remember, I still barely had any money that first time I was going to. This is, of course, this business group with all these like unbelievably successful, like some cases tens of millions, sometimes cases tens of millions profit companies, and here I am, like, I'm the razor guy. So yeah, 2018, I was still definitely like just sort of coming out of it. To be honest, like being really candid and transparent, I don't remember being very confident in myself at all from like that 2015 to 2018 situation. There was a lot of imposter syndrome, but I don't at any time remember genuinely considering giving up. Like, I wish I had a better answer for you. It maybe by just stupidity, it didn't occur to me. Like, it didn't really occur to me as an option. And I sincerely wish I had this wonderful list for you of like very healthy habits that I engaged in the whole time. I had no money. I had an incredibly supportive girlfriend who's now my wife, managed to be patient with me through all of that. But I think I had a couple home habits that brought me some comfort. I really like cooking. There was little things. So, I would give myself little breaks, but a lot of it was just spent kind of at the tiny desk in the corner of our tiny apartment on my laptop, trying to make it work, or I was at the warehouse or at our manufacturer, again, trying to make it work. So I think it was sheer stupidity and dumb luck. But I can tell you now, being in like kind of further removed and having had the room to build some healthy habits since then, if I might do so, I wish I'm going to give you what I wish I'd done. Moving every day, super important. I have a personal trainer now. But just going to the gym is great. I've moved almost all of my socializing from, at the time, you'd have like coffees or beers. You know, you're a young man in his early 20s. Almost all of my stuff is now we move when we're my friend Aaron Spivak, he's the founder of Hush Blankets. We live very close to each other in Toronto, so we do Wellness Wednesdays, which was just turned into Wellness Whenever. So we'll go on kind of runs in the morning and do a bit of cold tub after. We've got squash courts in my condo building that I use as much as possible. So just moving for me is incredibly helpful. Still cooking 10 years later, cooking still huge thing. So I find it's important to have a couple healthy things that bring you, and by the way, like I put all the devices away when I'm trying to make like a beautiful meal. Just separation from devices was key. It's like my own little personal space, and yeah, the movement. I think it's really easy as founders. People talk about like, oh, the importance of exercise. Look, exercise is important, don't get me wrong, but I think we have to remember sometimes you're only really up for the bare minimum. So I just like to call it movement. Like when you're going through hell and you got to keep going, just moving, just get something done. That's all you need to do if that's all that you can do. So I wish I had this like unbelievable, like, here's the secret sauce, here's how I like got through everything perfectly. But it didn't occur to me to quit, which could be a blessing. Yeah, I had a couple little things that were my own. Main example I'm using here is cooking, and just move a bit, move your body, even if it's a little bit, you'll feel the difference.
Yeah. The way that I look at it and I talk with founders is there's expending energy and then there's recharging and adding energy, right? And it sounds like to me, your cooking and your movement every day is and the cold plunges, etc., is what adds energy to your battery so that you can expel it in building your businesses and expanding them and growing them and creating them. So that's fantastic. So that leads us nicely into keto. How did that come about?
Yeah.
And what is keto?
I was going through the again, kind of when I was feeling willing to kind of poke my head back up above water by like 2018. There was a lot of, I think, embarrassment. When in hindsight, it probably didn't need to be so much self-imposed embarrassment about the Rockwell conundrum, so to speak. Just trying to like build the business up. But I really kept my head below water, but I did have the foresight in 2017 to apply to a program called Next Canada, which is kind of like Canada's version of Y Combinator, like a startup-esque program. I think I was like the only consumer good company that they ever let in. It didn't involve investment or anything. It was just sort of like a mentoring program. And through that, I met just some incredible lifelong friends and fellow founders. And one of those folks, one of his investors, had just exited a couple of years previously, had exited a company called Waylos to Weight Watchers, and was getting back into the entrepreneurial game, and had kind of co-created with a doctor out of UCSF this concept of a keto diet breathalyzer. So like a high-fat, low-carbs diet breathalyzer. It could sense when you're in ketosis. So we just were casually chatting about that. He introduced, because this guy was new to the consumer goods marketing world, and the product was purely at a concept stage. And casual conversations about advice on direct to consumer marketing eventually turned into a deeper collaboration and co-founding that company together. So that was probably, you're asking me at the top of this about starting multiple businesses. That was probably the beginning of my degeneracy, thinking that I could, now I've gotten through the tough stuff on Rockwell. I can start hiring a couple people for Rockwell and go start another company. How hard could it be? Anyone listening who can't see my face right now, I have a deeply sarcastic look. It was very difficult, but we did manage to do it. Keto, we raised some money from some phenomenally supportive investors, and we were able to go out and do what at the time was the biggest campaign I'd done, which I think was just a little north of $1 million back in 2018. That also felt like a really wonderful success of a campaign, and we got that company to mid 7 figures in ARR before towards, it was 2020 that I moved over to kind of back to the environmental stuff that was my bread and butter passion, which was co-creating Lomi with the partners that I mentioned earlier coming out of Pillacase. So that was like the keto story in a nutshell. Just a really great, innovative product with wonderful co-founders and phenomenal experience. So I'm grateful I got to do that one.
That's an incredible story. And it's funny you mentioned that, because I literally, for people listening, I'm holding up a precision extra meter.
Competition.
I think your product crushes this competition. You don't need blood or to poke your finger. So I'm actually in ketosis right now and just measured my ketone levels after a meal. Definitely a huge fan. Yeah, I know. I only do it a couple of times a year, so I've had this for years and still have the test strip. So anyway, I love that. And talk a little bit more about keto and the different use cases and who are those target demographics and the benefits of that. Because I think that's very, very interesting. And a lot of people, keto has gotten a lot more traction nowadays, but I think very few people know whether or not they're actually in ketosis, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think the diet principles have become fairly well known. Just the simple version is higher fat, try to barely eat carbs. And then that puts your body into a state of ketosis where it's burning fat for energy. Wildly oversimplified, sorry to every doctor listening. But yeah, I think the original, what we saw was in 2018, it was becoming quite trendy in San Francisco. In San Francisco. And as with so many things, when something becomes trendy in San Francisco, it's often it's either it's either about to be completely vilified and called ludicrous by the rest of the country, rightfully, or it's about to completely go viral. And we were fortunate that keto did have a high degree of medical merit behind it. We certainly felt that way, and we felt strongly enough that it deserved to, the product deserved to get some room to roam. So I think the target market, we never, of course, marketed it as a medical device, although we have put it through some medical trials, and it's performed very well. That whole process is super long, so even though those trials started in like 2019 and it's 2023, I still don't think I'm allowed to talk about them yet. But where it really kind of hit a nerve was there were a lot of technology and technology workers who were maybe felt that they were on the path to having solved for personal capital. And of course, the next thing that they're looking to solve for is health. And there was a lot of research coming out around ketosis. And there were folks who were not particularly interested in pricking their finger, or had been pricking their finger to measure ketosis the way it sounds like you did very recently, and thought, also, there must be a better way. And so when our product kind of came out of the woodwork, it spoke to quite a lot of people very quickly and became a bit of a phenomenon. So yeah, that was a crazy cool experience.
So you go from Rockwell Razors that raised, a few $100,000 between a couple campaigns, to Lomi that raises $7 million. In between, you have Keto, which raised over $1 million. With Lomi, we talked a little bit about the numbers and the estimates, and obviously we ran the reservation funnel and live ads for Lomi. But with Keto, you did that not with LaunchBoom, right? So talk, and I don't have any insights into actually what you did there. So how did you get to $1 million in raise with Keto?
Yeah, so it was with a different partner. It would be recommended to us by the investors, I believe. We ended up spending quite a lot, like more. I think that was a big lesson. Actually, you'll probably remember. I came to you quite cost sensitive on the Lomi marketing stuff. Just asking a lot of questions about that. I think from how much we spent on the video and everything else in Keto. So that was a miss. I think I probably, in hindsight, got a lot wrapped up in the exuberance of having, it was my first time raising venture capital money, and it all felt very exciting. So, I mean, we were able to still make the campaign was net profitable, but we spent a lot more on services and advertising and content creation on Keto, which raised $1 million, than we did on Lomi. Oh, I suppose on Lomi, at the end of the day, we'd spent more on advertising just to obviously support a $7 million campaign. But pre-launch, the difference in spend between Lomi and Keto was tremendous. So I think the big lesson takeaway there for me is it's important to spend money for quality, but there is such thing as going overboard. So I did appreciate that about LaunchBoom. Just I feel like you guys were one of the only agencies that I've had that come to fairness conversation with, and it just went really well. Like everyone kind of got it. Everyone knew crowdfunding really well. We could kind of understand the economics. And that was just a really positive experience. We could all kind of speak the same language, and obviously it was a success for everyone involved.
Yeah, no, it was definitely a massive success for us here at LaunchBoom. So appreciate you saying that. So for the Keto campaign, you didn't even run a reservation funnel, right? So you just paid a lot in marketing and for the video and asset creation. Like, where did most of the spends go into? And, to highlight what you mentioned earlier, a lot of founders come to us and say, hey, I wish I had investors, or I wish I had this. And that can certainly help, but it can also be a negative as well, right? Because then you start spending exorbitantly and it doesn't necessarily drive results. There's always an 80-20 split, right? There's 20% of the efforts that you focus on that generates 80% of the results. So what was the 80% that generated less results?
I would say I don't know that we did what is now kind of conventional reservation funnel for Keto. Maybe we did a little bit, but maybe that's just memory plays tricks after 5 years. What I can tell you is we were in a space with tremendous tailwinds. So keto was very topical. We also moved irresponsibly quickly. So we went fast and hard on the advertising. So I think by the time that we started advertising to when the campaign launched, we had a healthy list built up, but it wasn't from spreading out advertising spend over a long time and collecting high value reservations the way that Launchboom might. It was certainly more by just like going hard and fast. And there was not a lot of emailing people to kind of like keep them posted and get them excited before the campaign. It was sort of like, you've signed up for the email list. Probably most people within 3 to 4 weeks of signing up for the email list, we were like, we are live. You want the early bird? Like, let's go. So I think keto was very topical. I think that campaign moved very fast. It also, we had happened because we're in a situation where we had been able to raise some money. We had moved product development along quite far. So I remember, I think the keto campaign launched in September and we had indicated December fulfillment, and we genuinely did begin fulfilling in December. I think we wrapped up by February. But it did, I think there was a combination of all of those things. We managed to get around what should have been very detrimental to us, which was we didn't have certainly not a meaningful reservation funnel. CPMs, like advertising costs, should have been way higher. It just happened that we were in an incredibly topical, hot segment. So all
What were
of
your
these,
CPMs?
oh, Kevin, I don't know.
Yeah, all good.
Less than 2023, more than 2014.
Right. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I interrupted you. Please continue.
Oh, no, it's
I
just...
just had to ask.
No, it's good. I mean, again, brain potentially plays tricks on me. When you asked and I was laughing, the number 7, like, was summoned to my mind. Certainly not a quotable, though. Like, that's, I don't know. It's definitely lower than the CPMs that Lomi was playing at. So yeah, that was really it. We moved fast. It was a bonkers time, but yeah, in hindsight, there were a tremendous number of things that we certainly could have done better. So I got to take a lot of those learnings and apply them to Lomi, though, which is cool.
So what is a piece of advice that you would give to your 2018, 2019 self?
Oh, 2018, 2019. So we're talking keto days, and Rockwell is kind of like just post-stabilization, but it's not like a fully established business at that point. Probably to be more patient and be a little bit more confident in yourself. So I definitely, I think Rockwell, there was a big hit in the confidence around like it took so long to get out of the debt. I wasn't really sure if I was good, but frankly, that was it. Like I did not know if I was necessarily going to be able to scale as a founder. And I think what that ended up doing is I'm really grateful for everything I learned in keto and Lomi. But today I'm fortunate to be in a position where I kind of have a holding company of a lot of different things, and I spend most of my time managing that holding company as a wholly owned thing, and it's mine and mine own. But because of this lack of confidence back then, I put myself in a position where I was like, I'm good at marketing. I'll kind of offer myself up as the junior co-founder. I was always the youngest in the room, always the least experienced. I'm with people who had like gone to Harvard and Princeton and worked at McKinsey and were doctors. And then Lomi, it's these unbelievably like successful founders that I look up to, who sold agencies or sold other companies for just countless millions of dollars. So I sort of always position myself as the junior co-founder able to come in and help on marketing. But yeah, if I could rewind the clocks, knowing everything I know now, I guess for anyone listening who's kind of considering a similar position, I just ask you to evaluate what's the difference in the learnings that you'll get as a junior co-founder to a business partner who's further along down the line versus just risk it and start your own thing. Like just go solo. That's not to say you can't bring on business partners later if you go solo. But I think I'll always, for the rest of my life, wonder if I kind of spent my post Rockwell crazy years, so I guess my later 20s, if I'd spent that just taking full risk on my shoulders and trying to start like another Rockwell, how would that have been different? And I'm certainly at a place now where when I'm sort of managing this family, this portfolio of brands I've started over the years, or other things you mentioned at the top of the podcast, I find that a lot more fulfilling. That's just me personally. Like, everyone's different. So some people might really value working with one co-founder. Some people might value working with 10 co-founders. Some people really value being the experienced gray hair in the room. I'm doing air quotes for anyone looking or not looking. And some people might really value the experience that I did. So I'm incredibly grateful. I learned a tremendous amount as a marketer, but I got marketer confused with entrepreneur, and entrepreneur and founder is what I really wanted to be. So long-winded way of sort of saying I just evaluate, like, if you have a modicum of success, people will be beating down your door with all sorts of offers to do all sorts of different things with them. You just need to, if you're in that founder space, it's just going to be up to you to evaluate, like, do I want to help other people build a thing, or do I want to find out what happens if I just go solo, untethered? What happens? And there's only one way to find out.
I love that. Just really being intentional about where you personally want to be, right? And so that takes us into where you're at now, Gareth. You have a portfolio of businesses. They're all doing relatively well. You've gotten it out of hundreds of thousands of dollars in debts, or one of the businesses out of debts. What's next? What's next for you, Gareth?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, I think the truth is probably more starting businesses. I've gotten finally a true appreciation for when you hear in all those business books, they talk about like the value of people and the value of talent and giving people a shot. And when I was younger, I remember being like, I'm just going to do everything myself. You know, that stupid thought that everyone has. And I've been exceptionally fortunate through, again, Rockwell, Keto, Lomi, like all of these. I've met incredible people. I've been mentored by just brilliant people. I've learned a lot of things about how I want to build a business, how I want to build a life. And I've also witnessed a lot of things on how I don't want to build a business and how I don't want to build a life. So I've been able to kind of package all that learning into, and the people I've met along the way, into just being able to appreciate opportunities that come up when there's a business opportunity. I think I'm spending a lot of time identifying, hey, there's a market need for something. I know a tremendous portfolio of e-commerce brands, especially. How can I kind of package together a service or a piece of software that solves that need? And I sort of start with, like, what is something that I would value in my own companies? And I talk to my general managers, and if they're like, yeah, that would actually, if it kind of costs this, we'd really value that. Then I go out to my kind of trusted friends who will tell me, shoot it to me straight if I'm onto something or if I'm off my rocker. And yeah, if they're kind of interested, if they're saying, hey, this landing page agency is a great idea. This creative production agency is a great idea. Then it kind of takes the next step. So a lot of building software and service companies around just general needs that my companies have. And my immediate network is what's most interesting to me right now.
So you mentioned a lot about the self-doubts, especially 2015 or 2014 until 2018, and even a little bit afterwards. How would you overcome that? I mean, because now you come off as awfully confident, right?
Apologies, I'm not.
Well, I can tell you that you do. So what was the shift there, and what are the thought patterns? Because when you think that way for 3-4 years, it takes time and will to break those thought patterns and habits, right? What do you do to shift that a little bit, even if you don't feel like you're all the way there?
I mean, there are a lot of things. I can tell you, I'm very grateful to have been introduced through a friend who was a founder back in 2018 to a therapist who only sees founders. I know it gets talked about a lot nowadays, but just having kind of that confidant. I've been with him for now 5 years, and it's just been kind of key to getting clarity on a lot of those things. Yeah, I was joking, like, oh, but I'm not confident. I'm coming across as confident now. I think everyone has their good and bad days. I think I'm lucky today. Today's a great day. And I'd certainly have tremendously more good days than bad days. Certainly, like an incredibly more favorable ratio than, say, 2016 and just like the depths of Rockwell struggle. I think an appreciation for the fact that it's just money. Like, like at the end of the day, where I was stressing so much about something that fundamentally, it's just a business. It's just, at the end of the day, it's not that bad. It's a story I was telling myself that if I didn't succeed at this, it was some sort of tragedy. But it just took a lot of time to realize that that's not true. There's so many things that are so much more important. I think, just building a closer relationship with my family, building a closer relationship with my chosen family too, my wife and her brothers and their partners and her parents. Like, you just begin to kind of understand as your scope widens out of just the tunnel vision of the fear of your business that life is so rich. There's so much more to do and so much more to enjoy. After this call, I get to go. I mean, there's lightning going on right now, but allegedly I'm going to a concert with some 20 e-commerce founder friends. Like, that is so much more meaningful than like a plus or a minus on my, on my P&L next month. That's the spice of life. And it took me a while to get there. But I'm grateful that I kind of got there by about 29, 30. It's always a process to sort of understand your own mental resiliency. But I just ultimately really realized that, what I value, I think you and I have talked about this before. I didn't need to be some sort of business savant, which was a notion I didn't even have like a true definition for. It was just this idea of I had to keep going and keep going and keep going. That was the only way to succeed. But I've redefined my definition of success over the years, and not in a way like, oh, I need to redefine it. It's just I kind of found what was my actual principles, and just in a much better place. That's it. That's it.
Yeah, you mentioned a few books actually last time that we spoke. I think, if memory serves me correctly, that helped you define those things. What are some of those books that, or podcasts or people?
My favorite one that I recommend to anyone kind of considering entrepreneurship is a book by a brilliant entrepreneur. He's passed away, so I'll never get to meet him, but I wish I could. Felix Dennis. He wrote a book with a completely misleading title called How to Get Rich. It actually should be called Why to Not Start a Company. And it's really, the crux of it is just diving deep into everything that truly goes into starting a company, that isn't necessarily what gets talked about in the startup news and TechCrunch and all that stuff. It is difficult. So the book actually sort of says like, hey, listen, here are all the perils and pitfalls that you're about to get into. And then it's interspersed with his poetry, which is hilarious and just lovely. This is the founder of like a multi-$100 million publishing empire, kind of from like the 80s to mid 2000s, by the way. He did exceptionally well for himself, but he then writes this book called How to Get Rich, which is actually just about understand that if you make the decision to go down this path, here is the gambit you're making, plain and simple. So it's the first book I recommend to everyone, and it sounds so douchey. Can I say that on this podcast? It sounds so like it's such an aggressive title, but it's barely about that. It's more of a cautionary tale in a totally bite-sized format. So I recommend it to everyone. Totally underrated book.
It's a fantastic book. I can definitely attest to that. So you mentioned you're having a great day. What does a great day consist of for you? Like, walk me through a great day from the moment you wake up to when you go to bed nowadays.
Yeah. Oh, it's a great question. I get up, have some incredible Colombian coffee we get directly from a farm in Colombia. I go to my gym for either a workout or personal training session. I'm very grateful to be like a partner in that gym too. Just like getting involved in the local businesses I've found exceptionally rewarding, and you and I can have a whole separate conversation about that. And if you want to turn it into a podcast, we can talk about that, but can't even get into it today. It's really fun. And then typically I do like to get to work. Whatever that means for like every day is genuinely quite different. I have found myself traveling a lot more recently. I think maybe it was COVID. There was so much Zoom. I think this is the first video call. It's Thursday. This is the first video call I've been on this week. I try to do walk and talks, phone calls, catching up with friends, catching up with my general managers for all the different businesses, like pushing new ideas forward. And often I'll get on a plane to just like hash something out in person. Because I'm 30, I've still got a little bit of that like travel stamina left. I might as well enjoy it while I can. So yeah, my days look really different than they used to. There's a lot less kind of like sitting behind a screen in front of sort of a Facebook ads platform. I like to stay sharp and do a lot of that stuff. So I do still get in there and get my hands dirty on as many of my brands as I can, but not as like a job. I'm not the person who holds the responsibility to run the marketing in any of the businesses. So yeah, it's a lot more of like a general thing. So I have a very loose schedule. I'd say from probably 10 when I get back from the gym to 4-ish when I stop, and then I'm usually up to some sort of like quick social or cooking type thing, and then I'll kind of wrap up work, and again like 7 to 9, and then that's family time from 9 onwards, and yeah, try to be in bed by like 10:30 and get up at 5:30 the next morning and do it all over again.
Nice. What is one trait that you admire most in other people that makes you go, wow? And why do you admire those traits?
Resiliency. I've seen just the stark difference between, you can tell right away on a founder if they're going to, if they're the kind of person who in the face of adversity throws their hands up and makes it someone else's problem or tries to, or if they're the kind of person who's like, even if they're going to delegate, this is, I think, an important distinction. You can delegate the solving of a problem to someone else without completely dismissing the emotional and effective burden of solving that problem, as in like, it is still on you to solve a problem. The more intractable the problem, the more important this trait is. I've found I have a fairly good sense for people who are that level of resilient, or if they're the kind of people who foist problems onto others in a fairly dismissive manner. And then those are often the sort of founders that ultimately, whether it's immediate or later, will ultimately not succeed.
Yeah, ownership is one of the core values that we have here at LaunchBoom as well. And it's one of the reasons why, I've been an entrepreneur my whole life. I still, advise different entrepreneurs and companies, et cetera, right now. But one of the reasons why I enjoy working so much at LaunchBoom is everyone here is an absolute owner of what they do and takes full responsibility for it. So right on the same page as you there. So just before we wrap up here, Gareth, is there anything else that you want to leave for the audience listening? Founders, advice, quotes?
I'm not a big quotes guy. I just say I think everyone listening to this probably is interested in starting a business or starting a product. I would just leave folks who are kind of at that stage on deciding if they're going to go take the plunge. I would say this can be the greatest decision that you make. I've found it incredibly rewarding. I don't think I could imagine living a life in a way other than one where I'm kind of post having taken the plunge to build something for myself. I would, though, say it is okay to build your business around the life that you want to build. And I don't want that to sound like I don't want that to sound like some sort of like generic Instagram quote advice. Like, seriously, actually, Kevin, you and I have talked about this before. Like, it is okay to seriously consider, what is the purpose of this business? Not like, what is the purpose of the product? Why am I starting this business? I have friends who have started businesses exclusively because the revenue relative to the credit card spend is like, they can run a fairly safe business that puts a ton of credit card spend through their credit card, and they get tons of points and they get to travel for free. That's a ludicrously silly example. Anyone listening, please don't do that. Like, it's not, don't do it. But like,
Yeah, don't start a business just for credit card points.
just for credit card points. That is not my advice. But I would say just think about what it is that you want out of the business, and then instead of reverse engineering the business, how am I going to start this business? Reverse engineer, how am I going to get to the outcome that I actually wanted from this? And you may find very stimulating answers. It may be that there are just a myriad of other routes to get to your desired outcome. But it's so easy to get tunnel visioned on, I've got a great idea, I'm onto something, I'm onto this thing. But we're all pursuing outcomes. The world just runs on desired outcomes at the end of the day. So start there. And you may find that there are other ways to, if you're starting a consumer goods business because you're really good at marketing, you maybe consider you maybe should start that consumer goods business, but maybe you should start a services business. Maybe you should start a consulting business. Maybe you shouldn't start a business. So there could be other factors in your life or other things that you want. Everyone's different. So try to not buy into hype or buy into the stuff you're reading on the glamours of entrepreneurship. I'm not unencouraging you or disencouraging you from starting a business. I'd just say start from the outcome and try to imagine 5 different paths of how to get to that outcome. And you may find that you thought of that one before, the business, and I want to get to this outcome. And then you're like, oh my God, life is so rich. There's so many ways to get there. I found that a rewarding exercise as I've gotten deeper into this world.
That's the perfect way to wrap up here, Gareth. So one thing that I'll add for the audience is that's one of the 7 habits in the 7 habits of, highly effective people by Stephen Covey, right? Starting with the end in mind and, writing down what you want other people to say about you at your funeral. And I think I found that personally to be one of the most powerful exercises I've ever done. And then starting with that and then going through and break it down. Okay, what do I need to do in order to get there? Spend time with family, because you're always going to want your family to say Kevin or Gareth was the most loving family member, or is an incredibly loving family member, whatever that is that you want. So where can people find you online, Gareth?
I'm very much not online. And it doesn't mean that you can't reach out to me. It just, I personally don't get, as soon as I fire up a new social profile, I feel this cosmic anxiety to be present there, which just ends up not being productive for me. So my website, GarethEverard.com, I think it has my email on it. I reserve the right to revoke this if I get a ton of emails, but you can email me, I'll get back to you at some point. But I love hearing from founders. I get a lot of crowdfunding kind of questions. Those are the ones I really, the cold emails, so to speak, that I look forward to answering. So yeah, GarethEverard.com. I'm sure Kevin will put it in the notes. Go there. There's a little link to my email. And if you message me on social media platforms and you don't hear back, it's not you, it's me.
Well, awesome, man. I really appreciate your time today and sharing your knowledge and the experience you've been able to accumulate through all those trials and tribulations. I feel like I got to know you a lot better too, Gareth, personally, even though I felt like we had a pretty deep conversation last time we caught up. You mentioned that, I didn't mention this in the beginning, but I might even edit this out, but track, I ran track and cross country as well, social entrepreneurship club. I was part of that as well. I was an ecology major in college, studying aquaponics. So anyway, there's a lot of similarities there.
Blood brothers.
Yeah, sleeping on the factory floors around the same timeline. Anyway, so really enjoyed this conversation with you, Gareth, and very much looking forward to our next one together, man.
Yeah, it did.